has the title Meditation, Concentration, Meditation and Will. And before we go into the talk, I'd like to remind us of our periodical, where we have listed our activities. And I see that everyone has been here before, so we go straight to the talk. And I think I took up on a little bit of a challenge when I asked to have the title Meditation, Concentration and Will. To talk about a meditation is like talking about the absolute. Trying to define what meditation is like trying to define the undefinable. So tonight I hope that we together can try and explore what meditation is, what the process of meditation implies, and where the will and concentration comes into it. But in order to give ourselves a common basis, I would like to start off with three key words, and that is source, structure, and purpose. And to give that foundation, to be able to understand what meditation really is about, we need to understand that if we think about what we are doing right now, we're sitting in this room and we are all perceiving a lot of different things. We can perceive our own body, we can perceive the person sitting next to us and all the objects in the room. But everything that we perceive is a form, and that form has a beginning and it has an end. Now if we close our eyes and we go inwardly, we will also perceive a lot of things. But even those things have forms. Our thoughts have forms, our feelings have forms, and so on. And so we can see that everything that we are able to perceive is actually a relative reality. Because it has a beginning and it has an end. But we wouldn't be able to perceive that relative reality if there wasn't something else in us. So that which in us, which perceives, is what is the absolute reality. And the closest we can come to the absolute reality without making an object of it is by talking about the power to perceive. The power to perceive that is there for every sentient being. Everything is a living universe, and everything can perceive. So we cannot really say anything more about that absolute reality, because that's where meditation comes in. And we could say that the process of meditation is what will lead us from the relative reality to a realization of the absolute reality. So taking that in mind, when we then go further on and investigate the relative reality that we can perceive, we can see that there is nothing in this room which doesn't have a cause. Everything has a cause. So what we are actually perceiving are the effects of causes set in motion. Could be the minute previously, or it could be in many lifetimes ago. But everything has a structure. And so we can see that everything that has a beginning and has an end will follow the cyclic law which is inherent in the universe. So that is the structure that we are looking at. And part of this structure, we have the law of karma. The law of karma is not something outside us. It is the very essence of our being. Because it's just an aspect of this absolute reality, just as the cyclic law is an aspect of the absolute reality. So whenever we think a thought, we have a feeling, or we act out something in our daily life, we could say that we emanate a thought, we emanate a feeling, or we emanate an action. And what we emanate is a vibration. And this vibration never leaves us. But you can say that, for lack of a better expression, that it travels through different states of consciousness, through different environments. And on its way, it affects things one way or the other. And since karma is the great adjuster, it is that absolute law which maintains balance in the universe, the effect of our actions will be felt by us as well, because it will come back to roost with us. Because it has, as a matter of fact, never left us. And so we can see that, in this sense, whatever we perceive right now is a creation of our own thoughts, our own feelings, our own actions, without thought. And so to be able then to make a progress and to be able to meet all the consequences that we have set in motion. The other aspect of cyclic law is that of reincarnation. That everything from the minutest atom to the grandest system that we can think of as a galaxy or even further is actually something that has a beginning and has an end. And after the end, it will come back in a new form. And so do we, over and over again, in order to perfect ourselves as human beings. Because the human mind is the only transformative force in the universe. And that brings us to the third basic idea. It is that of purpose. Why are we here? And if we don't know that, it's no use to start to meditate or try the process of meditation, because motive is everything. The motive is what colors our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. So we have to know, what is this purpose of this existence? Why are we here? For what reason? And we think about the universal pure consciousness. It is reflecting itself simultaneously in all sentient beings. And we, as human beings, have reached the state where we are self-conscious. And you can say that in the lower kingdom, the three elemental kingdoms, the mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom, and the animal kingdom, the development is by inherent impulse. And that inherent impulse is from intelligences, hierarchies of intelligences, that works out the residue karma from previous evolutionary processes. And so we come to the human state, we wake up to the awareness of being self-conscious. Because everything is conscious. And now, we wake up slowly to self-consciousness. And now the question is, how can we have the help of meditation, the process of meditation, to go from self-consciousness to becoming conscious of self with capital letters? Because that's why we are here. We are here to develop a compassionate mind. We are here to develop a clear enough mirror in ourselves that we can reflect back as much as possible the divine universal consciousness. Within each one of us, we have the potential of a bodhisattva or a Nirmanakaya. You could say that is actually our true nature. But we are here to work to bring that into this everyday life so we can be of service. We are here to be of service. So if we think about these three basic ideas and we now put it into the context of meditation, we could say that the first idea, that of the source, that is meditation. That's what meditation is. Everything else is a process towards that goal, or towards, not the goal, but towards the realization of that absolute reality within ourselves. Now you could say that the second idea has to do with clarity. Because as we wake up to greater awareness, we begin to perceive with greater clarity the structure of the universe. We see that there is an order to all these things that can seem so chaotic at times. And the more we wake up with that awareness, the more eager we become to discern that structure and to work with it, instead of having it sort of work against us. Because after all, when we come to talk about the will, there is only one will, and that is the expression of the divine consciousness. We sometimes, or very often, pervert it and let our desires run wild, and it becomes passion instead of compassion. Now, if we take the third idea from the outlook of meditation, we could say that the key word would be compassion. We are here to develop a compassionate mind, and that is what meditation is all about. So now, coming into meditation, it's also important to understand the different, you could say, point of identifications that we have in each one of us. Because meditation is all about the point of identification, how we switch the point of identification from the little personal I to the more individualized I and to the more universal I. So what we see from the beginning is there is the power to perceive, which is spirit. And that you could say we could have a keyword called beingness. It just is. It's the isness of it. It doesn't change. It ever is. And then we have the field of experience. And we could say that we have three major fields of experience. And the field of experience is equal to the soul. The soul is our field of experience. It is through the soul that the power to perceives something. And we can see that there is a universal aspect of the soul. And that is what we can say, I am. And then there is an individualized aspect of that universal soul, which is the individuality, which makes us say, I am I. And it is this golden thread that each one of us has within ourselves. From the morning that when we wake up to the end of our life, and that continues into the next life, and next life, and next life. That is what is called the manvantaric body. That is our true identity. It comes from the Latin word individus, which means indivisible. And so again, in the individual aspect of ourselves, we are pretty much in accord with the universal aspect. But then we have what gets us into trouble. And that is the everyday field of experience, the personal mind, the personal aspect of the soul. And we all know how that is. I mean, and in extreme cases, just think about, I guess that everyone here has had a moment when you feel stressed out of your mind, right? And that's exactly a good description of what the personal mind is. It hasn't been called the monkey mind for nothing. It jumps from one branch to another the whole time. So the first and most important thing in all processes of meditation is to be able to cultivate the power of concentration. Because the lower mind is, you could say, fragmented, dispersed over everything, totally controlled by our senses. That what we think is us is basically just a sense input. And we take that for our identity. So how can we then move from that into the more consistent part of ourselves? And that takes concentration. There is a beautiful article by William Q. Judge in the 2 volumes of the Theosophical articles by him, and it's called Culture of Concentration. And for anyone, it is listed on the handout that you will receive in just a moment. There is a little list of articles that may be of value if you feel like diving more into it. But he says that in order to control our senses, we have to develop that aspect of our astral body, which is the permanent astral body. So all the organs that are now in what we call the astral body are diffused. They are not matured. But through the act of concentration, we can make those organs of the astral body mature. And that is what is needed in order not to be overpowered by all the sense impression on this level. So when we want to train the mind then, because the mind is the only tool that we have actually to make a difference, to make a change in this universe, to make a change in ourselves. So let's say that we want to sit down for meditation. Now, if we want to do it in an intelligent way, we ought to make use of the structure in the universe by trying to create a habit, by trying to create a cycle for ourselves, a cycle of meditation. So if possible, it's recommended to choose the same time every day. Really on the basis, it's like making a good investment. The best investment you can make is the investment in the self with capital letters. Because it never gets lost and it's always adding to, interest rate to it. So if we can create that habit, that's all good and well. And then there are many different techniques. But meditation is not a passive state. It's a high state of, you can say, awareness, of active awareness. It's an active, relaxed state, but no passivity. And one can choose a seed idea, one can choose a mantra, one can choose to focus on the breath. There are many different levels. And one has to find out what works for one. But pick something that elevates the mind, that trains the mind in the right direction, and keep that focus. Now we all know, and I guess most of us have tried to meditate at some point, right? And you may have a really good meditation. And then you walk out into the LA traffic, 5 minutes in the car, and all concentration is gone, right? So Mr. Judge has another good article where he talks about meditation. And he talks about 2 types of meditation. the time we sit for meditation is a small part. How do we carry it over in everyday life? How do we carry it over so it becomes a life meditation? And we do that with our motive. Because the motive of the heart is what will carry everything from one point to the other, from one moment to the other, from one step at a time. Because what we actually would like to achieve, or one of the purposes with meditation, is to shift that identification so that we become identified with who we truly are, the perceiver in us, and not with every state of consciousness that we go in and out of. If we would take 15 minutes of our life and scrutinize them, we would be in and out of different states of consciousness the whole time and become totally immersed in it, totally identified with it. And then we come back to ourselves and say, oh, right, where was I? You know, it's like driving the car down the freeway and you think about something else and all of a sudden you see, oh, well, I'm already at Sea Beach. Where did that time go? Because we are so immersed in different states of consciousness. Now, how many of us can say that we can stay awake when the body falls asleep, when we go to bed? It's a very tough exercise. Extremely difficult to do. But one of the purposes of meditation is to be able to move through the different states of consciousness without losing our awareness of it. And every one of us goes through 3 major states of consciousness during a 24-hour cycle. We have the waking state, we have the dreaming state, and we have the dreamless state. And everything that we do here in the waking state will affect our dreaming state, right? And then after the dreaming state, we sort of sink into the very essence of our nature. And it is said that we have all the wisdom accessible there. Then we have to go back to the dreaming state and try to remember that inspiration will come back into this waking state. And that's where the problem sets in. Because the dreaming state is so full of different distorted images. Now the fly is with me, Dr. Joe. So we have to clear out the dreaming state. And that we can only do by being consciously present and aware in the waking state. And so that awareness in its prolongation is then actually what will make us capable of remembering from one life to the next life, to move our consciousness from one lifetime to the next lifetime without interruption. And we know, for example, that the masters and higher depths have the capacity to do this. When their body goes to sleep, they don't go to sleep like we do. They stay awake. They have an unbroken lineage of consciousness, of awareness the whole time. So that is the real purpose of meditation. So I'd like to give out a handout and we can start to discuss on the handout. I think it's a pretty good sign that you're still awake, all of you. There's a new criteria for concentration right there again. So I would like... the most important thing when we want to dive into this topic, as I say, is the motive. So, Rob, would you mind, could you read? Is it okay for you, Rob, to read the first quote?
Did you say me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it difficult to read? Okay.
I don't know yet.
Okay. So, Dr. Joe, with a good voice, could you please read the first quote?
Meditation, concentration, and will. Has thou attuned our heart and mind to the great mind in the heart of all mankind? Why the sacred river's roaring voice, wherever all nature sounds are echoed back, so must the heart of him who in the stream would enter thrill in response to every sigh and thought of all that lives and breathes. This is from the Voice of the Silent, page 57.
And could you please then turn to the very last page and read us the last quote as well, please?
Isolation of the soul.
No, the very last one below.
Even in the earliest stage of his spiritual life, an aspirant for the higher life becomes a participator of the grand silent work in the spiritual enlightenment of his race. The current of the living moral and spiritual energy flowing from his heart, being his humble contribution.
Thank you. So, a friend of mine reminded me of that it is very important to set the keynote for why we want to meditate. And I think that the motive is the most important thing, as pointed out before. So that's why the choice was made to put this very first quote from The Voice of the Silence. And the last quote is put in there because it encourages every one of us to keep up our efforts. Because it points out that not even the smallest effort is in vain, but every one of us can contribute to reflecting back more of this universal consciousness. So do we have any spontaneous reflections or questions so far before we dive in more to the handout? Everything is crystal clear. No, it's not. Wes, go ahead and then Pierre.
It struck me as an unusual statement when you said that the mind is the only tool that we have. Could you say a little bit more about that? It would seem that we have other kinds of tools, and certainly choices are important, and our thoughts are important, but how is it it's the only tool we have?
I'm very glad you brought that up. I like to provoke in that sense. The mind is said to be the active aspect of the soul, the instrument of the soul. So if you see, everything that we can perceive has been produced by mind, hasn't it? And mind in its pristine state, you could say in its unaltered state, is a pure reflection of the heart quality. So I'm not talking about the mind in the sense of everyday mind, because our everyday mind is very many times just reactive and not truly creative. It's only when we begin to attune, you could say, the lower mind in accordance with the higher mind, which is equal to the heart, that we can become true beneficent forces in nature. So everything what you say was with thoughts, with the heart, and what was the third word? You mentioned another word.
Perhaps intuitions.
Intuitions, yes. Yes. And maybe it is so that, or one way to look at it at least, is that can intuition really come through as long as the lower mind runs wild? What it does, in glimpses it comes through. But if we can train the lower mind and quiet the lower mind, then surely more of the intuitive faculty could become activated. But what do you say, the rest of you? There are many developed minds here that I'm sure have something to say about it, because you bring up a very important aspect. Yes?
To me, when that hit me too when you said that, about the mind being the only soul. The first thing that I thought about was that as long as we're in this manifestation, everything has to filter through the mind. It's sort of the bridge that everything passes through. And it is the only source of us actually choosing an action or to not act, which is another choice, and noticing something that's even intuition versus our monkey mind. It's still passing through the mind. It's as long as we're manifested, that's the one perceptive, active tool that everything comes from as far as
Yeah.
growth and movement in this manifestation. I mean, if I'm putting that correctly.
Oh yes, I think so. Very well put. And I think what I would like to emphasize is the responsibility we have as students. How do we use our mind? We have another student at the lodge here which described it beautifully. He illustrated the mind as a pair of glasses. Now, if you drag the pair of glasses through a jar of marmalade, you will not see very clearly. So we have to sort of clean the mind the whole time, to brush off the dust of the senses of matter, so that we can reflect clearer what our true nature really is about. You still look puzzled.
Well, I'd like to kind of put in 2 cents for the value of our monkey minds, or the lower mind.
Oh, yes.
Because in a sense, it seems like there's only one mind. And the only one I know of is rather confused most of the time. But there would seem to be, that rather than say, well, it's just our lower mind, it's simply mind that's been in the marmalade a little too long.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something about our capacities of mind and self-reflection and understanding ideas that transcends all of the states that we're in and all of the marmalade or the mud or whatever else that we might be, confused by. It would blur our visions or our ability to see. So we see that our minds really, there's something really valuable in understanding how our minds work, and it's something other than just, well, they've been clouded by the marmalade. I mean, there's something essential about the capacity to think about thinking.
Yes.
It's unique about self-reflective mind.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something important about that. And I think it might be a little unfair just to say, well, it's just the monkey mind that reacts. Because that's what mind allows us to do. It seems like it allows us to identify with a situation. An actor, an actress on stage becomes the character. And if they don't, they're no damn good. There has to be, so there's something about the capacity of incarnation, of taking on a role about the mind that is both valuable and attractive.
Definitely. It's a two-edged sword, isn't it? How do we make the lower mind work in accordance with the higher mind? And as you say, there is just but one mind with different aspects. Like we have a soul with 3 different aspects. Like we have a feeling of I with 3 different aspects. So that's very important. How do we make it a usable tool? So it's not running wild with us, but that we are using it. We need a mind to perceive here. Otherwise we would be in really bad shape. Yes, Church, and then Pierre.
Yeah, I think that it's that higher aspect of the mind that notices the monkey mind, witnesses it, and decides at a certain point to try to control it. But like everything in this experience, I think with the monkey mind, which it's for us to grow from. So in that sense, it's like, yeah, we don't want to speak too negatively of it, because this whole experience is about noticing, it's about learning and then transcending. So it has its function, but it is the one mind, but it is good that it does have those aspects, because without those higher aspects, we wouldn't be able to get out of the monkey mind state. We would just stay in it, because there would be no other aspect to notice it.
Very well put. Yes, Pierre, we waited for some time.
The section that Dr. Joe read on page 4 there, even in the earlier stages from Bhavani Shankar, he makes an interesting comment there, because he says, even in the earlier stages of his spiritual life, the aspirant for the higher life becomes a participator. The question would arise, and where does that spiritual life starts actually? If we think again of mind, there is Kama Manas, but there is Manas, lower Manas as such, and there is higher Manas, and there is Buddhi Manas, and it's all one Manas, of course. It's a matter of focus and what you identify with it. But HPV points out that there is a path, the Antaskaran, that has 7 different steps. And I would imagine that the true spiritual life starts at the bottom end, where we are not yet. So we still live in the Kama Manasic realms. So I sometimes wonder, are we really following a spiritual path, or are we preparing ourselves for a spiritual path? Because HPV says clearly in the voice, if you don't have your Kama under control, forget it. You can't even put the first step on that path. So in that sense, you could say, if there are 7 steps to the Antaskarana, then there are 7 types of participators in the earlier stages of the spiritual life. Because you're a full participator when you reach the goal at the top. You become an adept, HPV. So in that sense, there are 7 types of participators. The question is really, are we already participators or more destroyers most of the time?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. We have here, and then we have church here. Yes.
I wanted to try to comment on the mind aspect. And what helped me is to think of the mind as being emanated from the oneness, the singularity. And it's like, I imagine it as like you're in a hall of mirrors. Okay, and your mind is functioning in all these different mirrors. The goal is to reflect the light as close to the original source of the light as you can. So like we have all these mirrors, like the Tom and traffic mirror, that's all warped and crazy. But there's not just like one easy way to catch this is the higher mind, this is the lower mind, except to say we're trying to like shine it back to the singularity, oneness, the whatever is emanating its source. Because for me, it's easy to get into categories and end up in analysis paralysis, so to speak, where you can't figure out. You're just bouncing around between warped mirrors, so to speak, in this hallway, and you can't see the truth. So anyway,
Yes, it's very important to point out the proceeds of universals, to have the larger picture. And isn't that what the process of meditation and theosophy is all about? Is to be able to make connections through analogy and through correspondences to see how things fit together. We have church and then we have on.
So just going back to what Pete was saying about are we actual participators, and looking at that line again, I think that's why it's saying an aspirant for the higher life is already a participator. Like the moment, and I guess whether or not you're even aspiring to a higher life really comes down to the motive, again, as everything does. But the moment that you are motivated toward that and aspiring toward that, you're already participating. And then that participation, I guess, grows as you develop. And
I find that quote so encouraging in that sense, because even if you just have caught a miniature glimpse of it, but you still have that image, you still have tasted something.
It's that no effort is wasted part.
Yeah. Yes, Ron.
Flowing from his heart being his humble contribution. Very interesting in a man mantra. Maybe the soul is the one that puts us in one of those 7 levels and says, aha, you can bounce around and you probably will come back to this all the time. We're in this mantra. So if you kind of hard, and you end up still a little hard, but a little softer.
A little softer and a little higher. It's a good combination. Yes.
I really like that comment. We were thinking kind of along the same lines that, what Theosophy teaches is true, that we've lived many thousands of lives. We probably have been, aspirants at various stages. We may have been even very close to enlightenment at one time, very close to, some of the most magnificent teachers on the planet. We also may have participated in some of the worst, evils on the planet. I mean, we've cross the whole gamut. That's my guess, is that we've been through it all already at this point. And we, Theosophy also teaches that we're descendants of that we have that seed of the Manasaputras within us, right? So we're also inherently Buddhas, each and every one. So we have that golden core, that golden light within us that Tom was speaking about, and we can't really know what our potential is and how far we may have gone in past lives, and that may be even a detriment to try and figure that out, because we probably won't in this life. But to assume that we have that capacity is key, and that we can, even at beginning stages, make a contribution. I think that really is a great encouragement. And the other thing I wanted to comment on was that the way you described one of the key aims of meditation as being able to maintain continuity through different states that we go through every day. The suggestion there also to me is that there is that sort of underlying natural state of mind, what Buddhists call the true mind, which does and can travel through all those states undisturbed. It is already happening. It's just that we're not aware of it. We haven't keyed into that deeper stream. But the idea that that's possible, and that it's also the most natural thing as human beings, it's like reaching who we really are as human beings to gain that kind of continuity. I think that's also really a powerful image, and appreciate the suggestion.
Yes, Rob.
It seemed to me that the monkey mind is in charge most of the time. That's the reason we have a conscience. In other words, what part does the conscience play? What is the voice of a higher spiritual mind, except the conscience? And how do we deal with the conscience if we want to go on as we've been living?
So what is the voice of the conscience, and how will we deal with it? Any thoughts on that? Yes, Wes.
I'd like to suggest a corollary question, and that is, how do we transform the voice of conscience, which so often is retrospective, into the voice of intuition, which helps us out ahead of time?
Well,
so often conscience is that which we chastise ourselves like, oh, why did I move that one up?
Yes, and I guess the reason why we do that most of the time is because we're not really at home when it happens. Our mind is diffused on so many different things at the same time that it may be difficult to stay in the present moment where the intuitive glimpses can come through more easily. Yes, George.
I feel like conscience is really close to guilt, kind of like what you're saying. But conscience, I think, comes in as you're acting when it knows that your motive is in the wrong place. So in that way, it is sort of close to intuition.
That's a good point. Yes, Pierre.
Well, our conscience is an aspect of the voice of the silence. But if we would say, usually it tells us that don't do it, or what have you been doing? It never but it never says, why don't you do this? Because if it would do that, it would take away our freedom to act. Because after a while we would just sit there and say, hello, where are you? So we are left to our own capacities to learn to judge a situation. But there is that in us which from time to time says, well, that was a real screw-up, basically, what you did there. Whereas intuition is also an aspect, we could say, of that voice. So there's probably many more aspects that we don't know, even in our present stage of evolution. By the way, HPV says in the Secret Doctrine Dialogues that intuition does not come from Buddha. Intuition comes from higher mass.
Yes, Rob.
Well, I'm just thinking, with all that's going on, it would seem that it's about time for somebody to start thinking about meditation and concentration.
Mm-hmm.
What this is we're entering into the realm of training, discipline, controlling our mind. We don't realize how often the monkey mind controls us rather than we control the monkey mind. If we control it, it's not really the monkey mind, then it's the human mind.
And that's a very, very important point you bring up, Rob, because that is often missed when we come to study together at the lodge. Many people get the impression that we come here and we have an intellectual discussion. And of course that's one aspect of it, but the way this student understands it is that we come here because we want to train our mind. We want to try and stay focused on the same topic. In this case, meditation, concentration, will. And we can see how quickly the diversification comes. That's the ULT method is a very, you could say, occult method in that sense. Yes?
Now, Rob brought up the word discipline, which leaves nowadays with a lot of people a little bit of a bad aftertaste of discipline. But they all want to be disciples, not understanding that the root of those two words is the same. A disciple is one who exerts discipline. The same root in the word.
So let us be disciplined and read the second quote, the heart. Linda, will you please read that?
The heart, the cultivation of right motive, takes more than one life. The control of the wandering mind is a necessity universally recognized, but how many think of the wandering heart? When the heart has been steadied, concentration of mind becomes easy, for an objective has been found. The mind gathers itself together and makes the objective its center. But without a goal or an objective, the mind can never gain one-pointedness. Many and varied are men's objectives in life, and the student of Theosophy is no exception to the rule. If he determines his objective to be neither the bliss of nirvana nor the developing of siddhas, low or high, nor achieving success in this or that sphere, but letting everything go to tread the path of renunciation, disciplining himself for the life of spiritual service, of orphan humanity, then he has found the correct objective, the right motive essential for the life of Chedashim. And that studies in the voice of the silence.
Yes, thank you. Any reflections on that? Yes?
I have a question opposed to peace. The statement that Don Blavatsky made that intuition comes from high mind. I would ask, could it ever come from high minds without the light of belief?
Yeah, that's the point that she makes too there.
Basically, we are in agreement on that one.
Any more questions?
This is a kind of certainty because by definition, higher matters is mind influenced by spiritual perception.
Yes.
Food.
Yeah. Wes, would you care to read the next quote, concentration, all the way down to the training of the mind?
No. Concentration. When concentration is perfected, we are in a position to use the knowledge that is ever within reach, but which ordinarily eludes us continually. Culture of concentration, W2J. Concentration or yoga is the hindering of the modifications of the thinking principle. Judge footnote. In other words, the want of concentration of thought is due to the fact that the mind, here called the thinking principle, is subject to constant modifications by reason of its being diffused over a multiplicity of subjects. So, concentration is equivalent to the correction of a tendency to diffuseness and to the obtaining of what the Hindus call one-pointedness, or the power to apply the mind at any moment to the consideration of a single point of thought to the exclusion of all else. Upon this aphorism, the method of the system hinges. The reason for the absence of concentration at any time is that the mind is modified by every subject and object that comes before it. It is, as it were, transformed into that subject or object. The mind, therefore, is not the supreme or highest power. It is only a function, an instrument with which the soul works, feels sublunary things and experiences. The brain, however, must not be confounded with the mind, for the brain is in its turn like an instrument for the mind. It therefore follows that the mind has a plane of its own, distinct from the soul and the brain, and which is to be learned. And what is to be learned is to use the will, which is also a distinct power from the mind and brain, in such a way that instead of permitting the mind to turn from one subject or object to another, just as they may move it, we shall apply it as a servant at any time, and for as long a period as we wish, to the consideration of whatever we have decided upon.
So here Wes, coming back to your point here, when I was a little bit black and white when I pointed out the lower mind as just the monkey mind, we can see that without the lower mind going out to the objects, we couldn't even perceive anything, could we? So that is a necessity, but here I think he puts it very well, that we again have to train the mind in such a way that it becomes a useful tool on this level as well as on the other levels. Yes, Vicky, please.
I think this points out one of the challenges we have when we think of ourselves as sexual beings. Because our categoricalizable, whatever, I just made that up. That tendency the mind has to look at everything as separate categories takes over. And we start thinking Buddhi, Manas, Kama. Well, if we could somehow see that those are aspects of one, and it's the one that's the perceiver, then we wouldn't get into the, desire bad, higher mind good, which is natural at this point in our human evolution. So to be kind to ourselves, but then also to remember that we're not distinct attributes, and it's neither good nor bad, it's what's necessary right now.
Very good. Very well put. Any other reflections before we move on to the next quote? This is very important. I think that he sums up the whole of the yoga philosophy here. One of those few aphorisms.
I have a question.
Yes?
It seems kind of a paradox here that if we choose to concentrate upon a subject, we therefore become entirely modified by it, do we not? And how is that different from the things that we become modified by, sort of by happenstance, circumstances around us? What we like, what we don't like, what we're told, what we absorb from our culture.
Could it be like...
What's the question?
Well, the question is, how is a subject we choose to meditate upon, or the fact that we focus on something, we become somehow modified by that subject. It seems like, by this definition, we can't help but do it. How is that different than the things that modifies and changes, sort of happenstance, by our karma or circumstances?
Wouldn't you think that the word choose is an important key word here? Because when you choose to do something, you direct your mind to a certain specific point, whereas otherwise it's more running wild. Could that be one of the ingredients, maybe? I'm sure that... But
I might also choose to be engulfed in, immersed in something that's just perfectly for me.
Yes.
Well,
the culture of the concentrative power can be used for many different things, of course.
Well, that goes back to why is coming in the paragraph above, is that without a proper focus,
yes,
a universal focus, then it's the monkey mind taking over and new guys.
Yes. Now we have many hands. We have Rob, we have Church, and we have Pierre. Rob, you
I just wanted to bring out the fact that in the subject tonight, will
yes.
is one of the topics. And we can't control the monkey mind without the will,
No.
unfortunately.
No. And we will come to a few quotes which is specifically about the will, which you bring up, which is the most important thing. Yes, we have church and then Pierre.
Yeah, just it is the choice, to focus on one thing, and potentially that is also addressed that you can choose to concentrate on something that's for the wrong reasons. But it comes back to the cultivation of right motive, which is in the heart again. Everything always coming back to motive. But there are other kinds of meditation that also don't have to do actually focusing on a specific object.
Mm-hmm.
But it's more about clearing the mind. But I don't know if this gets into that. But yeah, it's all down to the person in that respect. And the difference obviously is what Roger said, which is the exertion of your will actually to be looking at whatever's saying.
Yeah.
And behind that is obviously motive. But that's not the monkey mind anymore, just for the virtue of that concentration.
And it's what you're saying, you need to clear the mind. You have to have a motive to clear the mind,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then that in itself becomes a focus of concentration. Yes, Pierre?
I think we have to make a distinction here also between meditation and concentration.
Yes.
Because you have, generally speaking, 3 stages. Concentration, not even meditation, because first you have contemplation, after concentration, contemplation, and then meditation. But of course you can use meditation as a verb, and then you're not referring to any particular state of consciousness. I can say, well, I was meditating and because I was learning to concentrate, or I was meditating and I was learning how to contemplate. So we have to make those distinctions, that there is the word meditation as a verb, a process, and then how do you call that process? That's a different approach. But the mind that works on the outside takes on immediately the form of whatever it looks at. And that's what we're trying to, in other words, the energy is dispersed. Whereas what we have to learn to do is to concentrate the mind as a laser so that it penetrates the surface perception of whatever we focus on. Because there's meditation with and without a seat. Well, before you go to meditation without a seat, you have to learn to meditate with a seat.
So that would be a little bit an answer maybe to West's question, what is the difference? Because when we focus on something, which is a prolongation of concentration into contemplation, we dive more and more into the essence of whatever object that we contemplate. And he said that we draw out all the associated ideas with that. So that is a way of a modification of the mind in one sense as well. Even though I don't know if that expression would be correct to use, but we peel off all other modifications for the moment in order to be able to focus on one thing at least.
But if you take that to its extreme, later on in Patanjali, it is said that the yogi is able, by doing exactly that, to take on the nature of whatever it meditates on. So it can figure out the consciousness of whatever object is perceived.
I think that we should move on and read the 2 quotes on the will, so we don't go away from here without having addressed this very mysterious power. And Chris, would you like to read the 2 quotes on will, please? It's on page 2 in the middle.
The will. Will is universal and belongs to not only man and animals, but also to every other natural kingdom. The good and the bad man alike have will, the child and the aged, the wise and the lunatic. It is therefore a power devoid in itself of moral quality. The quality must be added by man. From Meditation, Concentration, and Will. Second quote, no mere practice will develop will per se, for it exists forever, fully developed in itself. But practice will develop in us the power to call on that will which is ours. Will and desire lie at the doors of meditation and concentration. If we desire truth with the same intensity that we formerly wished for success, money, or gratification, we will speedily acquire meditation and possess concentration. If we do all our acts, small and great, every moment, for the sake of the whole human race, as representing the Supreme Self, then every cell and fiber of the body and inner man will be turned in one direction, resulting in perfect concentration.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Jeremy.
May I object to the term monkey mind? Believing that however trained a monkey might be, he will never have the reflective mind of a human being.
Right.
So lower mind.
Lower line.
Okay, point
Makes the
taken.
monkeys look bad.
So what do we say about the will here? What are your reflections on the willpower? Yes, Julie.
This sentence here, if we desire truth with the same intensity that we formerly wished for success, money, or gratification, we will speedily acquire meditation and possess concentration. Wow, that's pretty important.
It is. It's very important. It is. It is how much energy do we put in?
Yeah.
If we put in like 10%, we cannot expect to get out 60. Yes, Pierre, and then Wes.
Well, one way of looking at it, there's a standard slogan. Will is the power of the spirit in action. Well, what do you do with it? But is in essence the will not the capacity to turn a subjective image into an objective image? And in other words, application of ideas.
And
There's 50 different other ways of saying the same story.
And also to turn objective perceptions into subjective perceptions. I guess it works both ways, probably.
Oh,
Wes?
I just had a fleeting thought about what does speedily mean?
What? Sorry?
What is meant by speedily?
Speedily.
Yeah.
So that means like timer two, that's pretty fast.
Manvantaras probably.
Yeah, exactly. How long is that?
7 lifetimes, maybe?
Maybe even 7 lifetimes, as pointed out in the voice. Yes.
It's an interesting line to think about it. If we desire truth with the same intensity that we formerly wished for success, I'll get you hopping.
Does. So, Pierre, why don't you please continue to read the next quote from the same article?
Meditation. Let us divide meditation into two sorts. First is the meditation practiced at a set time or an occasional one, whether by design or from physiological idiosyncrasy. Second is the meditation of an entire lifetime, that single thread of intention, intentness, and desire running through the years, stretching between the cradle and the grave. For the first, in Patanjali's aphorisms will be found all needful rules and particularity. If these are studied and not forgotten, then practice must give results. The mysterious subtle thread of a life's meditation is that which is practiced every hour by the philosopher, mystic, saint, criminal, artist, artisan, and merchant. It is pursued in respect to that on which the heart is set. It rarely languishes. At times, in meditating, one greedily running after money, fame, and power, looks up briefly and sighs for a better life during a brief interval. But the passing flash of a dollar or a sovereign recalls him to his modern senses, and the old meditation begins again. Since all Theosophists are here in the social world I refer to, they can everyone take these words to themselves as they please. Very certainly, if their life meditation is fixed low down near the ground, the results flowing to them from it will be strong, very lasting and related to the low level on which they work.
And that left us speechless, didn't it? Another thing that's is very important and emphasized in the theosophical literature is to combine with meditation is self-study, of course. So, who would like to read the next quote that is still on page 3 after where Pierre just stopped? Ted, would you like to read it for us?
There is something profoundly important in stressing both meditation and self-study, in bringing the two together. We must reconcile what would look like a pair of opposites and get beyond despair to something else, which allows an existential and dynamic balance between meditation and self-study. This is the quality of compassion. It is in the heart of every human being in his response to human pain, and brings him truly into the fellowship of those beings of boundless compassion. A man is a Buddha before he seeks to become a Buddha. He is a Buddha potentially. The Buddha at one time must have had a desire to become a Buddha, to understand human pain. The Buddha vow is holy because it is a vow taken on behalf of all. There is in everyone the capacity to want something for the sake of all, and also honestly to want it for oneself. In this there is an authentic mirroring in every human heart of the highest, the holiest and the most pregnant of beginnings of the quest. There are many beginnings, many failures, and many seeming endings. The quest itself, since it applies to all beings and not only to any one man, is without beginning and endless. It is universal, since any individual quest in this direction becomes at some point merged into the collective quest. Put in poetical form, or recognized in the simplest feelings, there is something metaphysically important and philosophically fundamental to the connection between meditation or self-transcendence and the kind of self-study which makes true self-actualization possible. There is a way in which a man can both be out of this world and in this world, can forget himself and yet be more truly himself. These paradoxes of language are difficult to explain at one level, and yet we all know them to be the paradoxes of our very lives. In our moments of greatest loneliness, we suddenly find a surprising capacity to come closer to beings far removed from us, men of different races and alienated groups in pain. Then we come to feel a brotherhood that is so profound that it could never be secured in any other way. These are the part of the everyday experiences of mankind.
Thank you. Any thoughts or comments on that? Yes, Linda, please.
Well, it seems like if you spend your time meditating on just wealth and material goods, it just would be a total waste of time.
Yes.
Because you never raise your motive and to attain something spiritual, something worthwhile.
Yeah, the motive seems, we come back to that again and again, the motive, I think you put it very well at church some days ago, where you said, well, if we only focus on service, all the rest will fall into place. And that focus is not that easy. That is the discipline with the will that Ron was talking about. But the motive is all, yes. And what does it imply with self-study here? What do we understand by self-study? How does that differ from meditation, or the process of meditation? We can read that we are supposed to look upon the lower in the light of the higher. But how do we do that? What does it imply? Anyone has any questions or any reflections in that line? Yes, Rob.
Well, self-study requires that you get beyond the three qualities, the qualities of nature, which really represents our karma. We have to more or less awaken to the self by overcoming the karmic debt that we have.
So to be able to look upon it, we have to achieve a higher position, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, in the Patanjali, that's referred to as isolation of the soul.
Yes, yes.
In other words, you no longer are karmically bound, at least with that moment of meditation in Patanjali.
So that's it, when you perceive the idea straight, directly. You see things as they are, basically. Yes. We had a hand, yes, please.
I think of self-study as like the higher mind looking and watching the lower mind.
So do you mean like trying to take the position of the perceiver in order to study how the lower mind works? Is that how we should understand it, or would you elaborate on it a little bit more?
Well, it's like going with I am that and trying to back everything up as far as you can with that. And then with that standpoint of watching things, self-study as a, as far as like what your actions are in this world, and your Maya interactions. I don't know, maybe I'm not 100% correct on that, but that's kind of where I was. Because meditation is like withdrawing from everything material, right?
Well, it's to be able to try and come closer to that which we truly are in order to be able to see things as they truly are. So I think you have a very valid point there. Yes?
Yeah, I think that's very good. The self-study with concentration, and then the mind will actually eject the false, or the person will realize the false ideas, and he will determine which is the truest idea, and then he will be able to start self-actualization. Otherwise, he's just going to be around the mind, what do we call it, the moving mind? We're just going to move from here to there. Then he cannot start his self-actualization.
It's like the symbol of the wheel. If we're out in the periphery of the wheel, everything is spinning pretty quickly. But if we can just move towards the center, then we can, observe what is going on there. And we can even wander out on the spokes and take part of it, but we know where our center is, which is this important one. I would like to read one more quote, and that is the isolation of the soul quote. And Chris, may I ask you again to read that?
Where is it?
It's on the last page, page 4. We turn to the last page, it's just at the top, isolation of the soul.
Isolation of the soul. Verse 33. The reabsorption of the qualities which have consummated the aim of the soul, or the abiding of the soul united with understanding in its own nature, is isolation. Judge's footnote. This is a general statement of the nature of isolation, sometimes called emancipation. The qualities before spoken of, found in all objects and which had hitherto affected and delayed the soul, have ceased to be mistaken by it for realities. And the consequence is that the soul abides in its own nature, unaffected by the great pairs of opposites, pleasure and pain, good and evil, cold and heat, and so forth. Yet it must not be deduced that the philosophy results in a negation or in a coldness, such as our English word isolation would seem to imply. The contrary is the case. Until this state is reached, the soul, continually affected and deflected by objects, senses, suffering, and pleasure, is unable to consciously partake universally of the great life of the universe. To do so, it must stand firmly in its own nature, and then it proceeds further, as is admitted by the philosophy, to bring about the aim of all other souls still struggling on the road. But manifestly further, aphorisms upon that would be out of place, as well as being such as could not be understood, to say nothing of the uselessness of giving them. Potentially good application.
It's a powerful statement, and there's a lot between the first verses of Patanjali and these very last verses. In between that is all the modifications of the mind described, basically. Any thoughts or reflections on this passage? Yes, Robert.
Things seem to be summarized around willpower. The force of spirit and action, as was said earlier. What is spirit? See, spirit is universal existence. We think of spirit as something ethereal or something goody-goody or something like that. But spirit is real, you know, it's the universal presence. If we'll just recognize it within ourselves.
So, is it the modifications of the mind that enable us to recognize it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Joanne, you had your hand up?
This isn't thought well out, but I thought I heard you say earlier, and I forget if it was something we read or it was the original lecture, that even a rock has will. So, is that will the universal spirit, and the will that we're looking towards is being in alignment with that will no matter what? That is the ultimate will that we're shooting for. But if you're going for money or wealth or power, the will is directed in another way, and you can meditate and concentrate on that just as much. And the one thing that hit me was when somebody was talking about conscience and guilt. And I'm just wondering, are the two parts of that word means conscience, with to be with all knowledge, which to me means the same as that will. And that if conscience is actually working in a way that's not destructive to our being able to achieve unity, it would have to be not to make us feel guilty and punished, but to allow us the discipleship to follow that which is true, as opposed to the modifications of that.
It's interesting, isn't it? Is it the modifications that makes us not being able to think for ourselves? Is it the modification that stops us thinking for ourselves? That stops that true will, that stops that true creativity or intuition or power in us?
Did you say, is it the...
Is that which stops us, the modifications of the mind? All the different concepts that we have limit us. Yes, we have Vicky and then Joanne again.
Well, and along this line, it seems that the challenge is to let go of our personal view of meditation, concentration, and somehow diffuse and dissolve that. Then we could be meditation, concentration, in a way, because that's what we really are. It's our imagination, our fantasy, our separate, daydreaming, so to say. It's our personal conception that keeps us from what we really are.
And what you are just describing, wouldn't that actually be the modifications of the mind that we have to continue to work with? So our concepts can just become as much of a hindrance in that sense, what we think, what we hold on to the most. Yes, one last comment, please.
Oh, it's the last one. I was doing some reading the other day, and you made the comment, order and meaning are things that have become and are no longer becoming. And this is helpful to me in thinking about the will, because the sense of the rock having a will is like everything is becoming. And I think that's more of what's being talked about. It's like there's different, the level of will that we associate with as humans is more like wills that come from our fears versus our loves. So I hope that maybe here's some light.
Yeah, when the will is captured by the senses, it becomes more of a desire, the personal nature maybe.
So,
and
It's more like what's driving the change.
Yes. Yes, what we
You know,
have.
just the point of will in the rock. It's awareness.
Yes.
In other words, the mineral kingdom responds to its environment. And the old saying, hydrogen and oxygen turn into water. There's an awareness of the circumstances in the presence of their environment.
Thank you. That will be the last comment for tonight. We have realized that this is a very large topic. We could go on for hours. But next week we will have another exciting topic. What happens after death? And everyone is very welcome to that discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you.